Good morning, my friends. Welcome to this episode of Happiness After Codependency. I'm Marshall Berkshire, and I'm your guide back to trusting yourself, knowing, loving, and living who you are. That's how I approach codependency. So I'm really excited to see you guys this morning. Today we're going to have episode 6 of Emotional Well-Being. So I haven't touched on this series for a while. And today I was perusing the Facebooks, and there was this post by a friend of mine about meaning making, and I was like, ooh, let's talk about meaning making. And I've likely discussed it in other videos because my sense of things is saying, yes, we've discussed this, but it's always good to have a review and go a little deeper on it. So that's what we're going to be talking about today. So before we get to that, I'm going to share this out to the community here real quick. Now, if you want to join the community where you get support, tools, and guidance in your journey back to yourself, the link is above on Facebook. It's below on YouTube. If you're on YouTube, hit that subscribe button, and thank you guys for doing that. And if you're listening via podcast or via Instagram, go to my website, freetheself.com, and go to resources, community, boom. Now, a couple of things to be aware of. You need to read the rules first to make sure that those rules work for you, because the community is guided by those rules. And we're really deliberate about those things because our goal is to create a safe, secure container for us all to help navigate the traumas we're dealing with and come to more fruition and healing and growth. Now it requires some very clear and direct and deliberate rules. So check those out before you join the group, and I'll see you in the group. So I can get this shared out now. Let me know. Say hi in the comments below. It's always like seeing you guys, seeing how you're doing. And I'm going to click the button now if it ever comes up. And there it is. Hallelujah. Here we are. So, meaning of making. I wish it would give me the title. Yeah. The habit of meaning making. Why we do it. What we're going to do instead. So, here we go. What is meaning making? Let's start with that first. Meaning making is the story I create in response to my situation, to my pain, to my joy, to what I'm feeling, to why I'm feeling or going through something. So meaning making is an attempt to answer the question, why is this happening to me? Why am I feeling this? Why is it happening at all? What is the purpose? Things like that. My experience with meaning making is it's an attempt to find safety, it's an attempt to find understanding, it's an attempt to find a way to navigate what's showing up for us. It is a response to this big unknown that we deal with called life. And so our brains, like stories, human beings are story-driven. Stories make sense to us. We gravitate towards them. This is why books, music, movies, games, all that really speak to us. They can connect with us and move us and transform us, is because story is something that we live through. And so meaning making is about story making. What story am I making that helps me understand and live with and work with what's showing up in my world? We can have a lot of different stories about things. We can have conflicting or contradictory stories about the same things. We can have stories that are utterly false narratives about our experiences. They can have stories that are partially accurate and inaccurate. And we can have stories that are accurate. Meaning is one of those things that drive us in our lives for purpose, for relevancy, for a sense of connection and emotional importance in our experiences. So meaning by itself is not necessarily a problem, but meaning making can be. And it's one of the challenges here when it comes to big pain in our world, big joy in our world, big significance in our existence and what we experience. Meaning making is going to get in there somewhere. So we'll give you some examples from my own life of meanings that I've come up with. So early on in my world, there was abuse. I'm not going to get into specifics, but there were some attributes of sexual abuse, and from there, I created meanings about myself, I created meaning about women, females, and I created meaning about sexuality from that abuse. And abuse was not known to others until about 10, 12 years ago when I started divulging that, hey, this happened to me when I was growing up, and this is how it shaped me. And that meaning is part of that. Shaping was part of that meaning. It's like it's altered the way I relate, way I interpret, and the way I experience sexuality in my world. So that's one way in which meaning can show up. I'm going to choose something that's probably a little less intense there. So another way we create meaning, or another examples, I'm going to do this with money, because I'm exploring that quite a bit right now. Money and meaning can have a huge, they can be all, ancestrally, just, they can be enmeshed very, very, very deeply, and they can feel like they're the same thing, because money has a significant amount of power in our world. A lot of times our survival is directly linked to the money we have or don't have. That right there can create a lot of meaning around it. It's like, it's critical I have this, and if I don't, then I'm not worthy, I'm not lovable, there's something wrong with me, there is I'm being picked on. Like, one of my big stories, my big meanings, was that things were being done to me deliberately from an external source, specifically in this case, deity. I was supposed to suffer. I was supposed to go through this so I could learn a lesson that I was supposed to learn because of the thing. And that created a huge amount of betrayal in my experience, a lot of trauma, a lot of like, wow, I'm being abandoned and betrayed by a deity that's supposed to be a caretaker, that's supposed to love and care about me, but yet these things are happening to me. Well, what's wrong with me? What did I do to deserve this? What do I need to learn from it so it'll stop? This is how meaning making starts happening. It's because we have this conclusion we're coming from, or this assumption we're coming from, that says that it's happening because of. And that's where meaning making becomes really toxic for our healing, because we're experiencing legitimate pain. Like when my mother died, I went through that sexual abuse, or the physical, emotional neglect and abuse growing up. The meaning cut me off from my pain. It cut me off from the ability to actually process that, because that's what needed to happen there. But the meaning also helped me cope with the pain, because there were no other resources to navigate it. So it's an interesting paradox that enters our existence there, is the meaning helped me cope with the things I didn't have skills to cope with. And as we grow in our healing, as we mature into our wholeness, we mature into the awareness of our wholeness, because wholeness is a part of our natural completeness. And we start to decode or discover these meanings, these stories we've created around our experiences. Like coming back to money. In the last 2 years, I have stripped money of its meaning. I'm like, man, money is not necessary for that, not necessary for that. What does money look like without the meaning I'm giving it right now, without the significance I place upon it? What does my pain look like when I set aside the significance or meaning I'm giving it? That might sound like, ooh, we're minimizing our pain. But what we're actually doing, what I've discovered actually happens when I do that, is I get into a more raw, sincere, and genuine experience with my pain. So rather than, I'm feeling this pain because I have to learn something, it comes into like, I'm feeling this pain because I've gone through something. I actually get connected to the reality I'm experiencing or have experienced, becoming more connected to my lived experience, my real story, which is, wow, that happened to me. This was its impact. Here's what I need to do for myself. That's a real journey right there. It's not that, this happened so I could learn this thing. That's a common story we have there. That may not be true. It may be true in other things. You get to determine what that is for you. But in my journey, I find that if I'm more like aligned with my lived experience, like, wow, this is happening, here's how it impacted me, and here's what I'm going to do now, I have a much more inclusive experience, and it integrates the pain. The pain no longer lingers. It's more like, wow, I can care for myself here. And there isn't something I have to figure out post hoc with this experience. Instead, it's just the experience. I can acknowledge what I did discover through it and then go from there. So meaning making can inhibit our healing because it introduces variables and elements that aren't part of the real experience. One thing with shame, for instance, when I started looking at shame and working with it in my world, there's a huge amount of story around it. I am a shameful person was one of those stories. So I am shameful because I'm intrinsically harmful and bad was another one. So when I started disconnecting the shame from the story that I'm intrinsically bad and harmful, I started to see that this shame I was feeling was in response or reaction to the ways I was being treated about my needs, my wants, my feelings, my own pain, my own joy. And I'd internalized these reactions as something wrong with me, and now I could see this relationship with it, and then I could decouple those things, my needs and wants, feelings, lived experience, and so forth, from the shame, and then care for the part that was actually really scared, the part that felt like there's something wrong with me. And I nurture that aspect of myself back into connection with its wholeness. But I had to let go of the story first in order to see the reality that was there. So when it comes to meaning making, it's not usually constructive, especially when it comes around pain or comes around loss. Instead, getting more connected with the sober reality we've experienced allows us to actually integrate the experience, find peace and closure, and move forward from a more complete sense of self. So that's what we do instead is we make contact with reality. What is going on now? What's happening now in our world? What do I need here? How can I care for myself? And what do I discover in that process? I have found that this approach is it's gotten me to where I am now. Because if I had stayed in the stories that I had bought into as truth and reality, I wouldn't be talking to you right now. I'd probably still live in Salt Lake. I'd still be doing other things that I don't do anymore that were really, really painful for me. We break free of our story. We step back from it. We start evaluating things from a different lens. We can find freedom again. We can find contact with what's real and allow that realness to guide us forward into more self-trust, more knowing ourselves, more caring and loving of ourselves, and more living who we are, more being of ourselves. That's the magic here with letting go of meaning making and discovering what's actually there. So I'm going to share that today. Let me know your thoughts below in the comments on Facebook and YouTube, or shoot me an email and go to my website. You can just shoot me one right there. I just go to resources and to the help desk, and you can let me know your thoughts there. My friends, take this into your world. Let's see what you discover in your journey as you move forward by looking at what meaning you're creating and then setting it aside and seeing what reveals itself. Pamela says, did you first get into a healthy relationship with another or with yourself? Well, that's an interesting question. So we can have a little Q&A if you guys want. We can do that. This is a tandem thing, okay? It's not one then the other. It's both. And this is really kind of a innovative thing in my world, because we're often taught, we need to be either in a healthy relationship or in a healthy relationship with ourselves before we can be in a healthy relationship with someone else, blah, 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 blah. As I have looked at my life, as I've healed and grown, I've noticed that it's always been both. So my work is in getting into a healthier relationship with myself while supporting and nurturing healthy relationships with others. And I started with platonic friendships first. I did not start with romantic relationships because romantic relationships carry an enormous amount of risk and threat because our big attachment traumas get activated there, and nervous system dysregulation. I mean, let's start with things that are a little more simple, a little easier to manage, and can actually add what we need to our lives in order to take the big leaps and risks that it takes to build romantic relationships. So I started shifting my relationship with my sense of value first. And that started with decoupling my behavior from my value and my sense of self from my behavior. So what that means is what I do does not define who I am. Instead, who I am influences how I behave. Because a lot of times we interpret our behavior as something, I did this bad thing, or this poor behavior, or this thing that hurts someone. I'm a bad person. There's something wrong with me. If we disconnect our behavior from our sense of value and who we are, then we can say, okay, I am going at this level. I started with, I assume that I have high value and that I can behave better. I can communicate my value, my feelings, my appreciation for other people better. So I can improve my skills and my behavior to better express my intention, to better express my person to others. So I took 100% responsibility for my choices and actions, my behaviors, my value, and my needs and wants in that. And then I started seeing how others responded to these behavior shifts that I started making. And that helped me identify people I could build healthy friendships with because they were receptive to it. So it was both. And it's going to be both because we're interdependent with each other. We cannot be an island to ourselves, but we cannot just be completely dissolved into someone else. These will never be healthy alternatives. The healthy alternative is I'm a sovereign person, you're a sovereign person. We build connection and reciprocity, friendship, care, ways that work for us, if indeed they work for us, because sometimes they don't. So loving and caring for someone might mean we are disengaged from particular kinds of relationships with them. So Pam says that makes sense. Platonic healthy relationships are first as you were getting on the path of a healthier self. Yes, platonic friendships. And then friendshipping and liking and getting to know myself more. Healing the shame, healing the meaning I created around myself about who I am. I deconstructed that story, and honestly, I'm more in the question of who I am than in the definition of it. So if somebody says, well, Marshall, tell me who you are. And I'm like, well, look at my behavior and that'll tell you who I am. And some days I'm a chipper person. Some days I'm a chompy person. Some days I'm a stoic person. So who I am, something I work on discovering every day. I do have a core sense of self, and that is based on principles that I value. And these are felt in the body. I know my limits. I know my tendencies, my predispositions. And I know my values. I know what matters to me. And I know, I've got a personality type that can be chompy and fiery and stuff like that. I own that. That's okay. So coming to know myself is always an act of discovery, so that I don't get stuck in a story about who I am 12 years ago. Well, that's not who I am now, and it's not who I need to be, and who I am now is not who I'm going to be in order to get where I want to be in my life. So it's an evolution. But yeah, so it's a tandem. I'm building healthy friendships at this point with a healthier relationship with myself. And once that became more stable and more reliable for me, I got a lot more experience in it. Then I was finding a desire to explore romantic, intimate relationships from the same approach. And then I've done that, and I learned a lot about myself in that, and that's where I'm currently in my current relationship. That's expanding and growing and very, very stable, very, very reliable, which is really nourishing and reassuring for me. And it does require me to continue to know myself, and care for myself, and love myself so that I can be properly available for them. And my girlfriend does this with herself too. We're very proactive in caring for our individual selves and then sharing what shows up, sharing when we need some shelter, some care, some reassurance, some support, some play, those kind of things. So it's all, look at it as a journey and not as a destination, and it becomes a lot easier because healthy relationships are maintained, they're evolved, they're grown. They're not just, oh, I have arrived, and then we move on to something else. They are a living thing that we need to cultivate and nurture, kind of like a garden that way. So that really relates to meaning making. I mean, meaning making in a relationship, whoo. I mean, let me know in the comments below if you've made assumptions about what someone thinks or feels about you or what their intent was when they did a thing, and then you find out you were completely wrong, and that created pain. The behaviors and actions you took from those assumptions created pain and confusion, because that is something I've done. That is something that's very, very common, and that comes from meaning making. That comes from making conclusions, assumptions, judgments, and expectations about something or someone or some situation. That's called the cage. And that's critically important to identify and stop in our thinking and in our relating, because our goal needs to be what is honest, what is clear, what is real. And the only way we get there is by stepping out of our conclusions, our assumptions, our judgments and expectations, and acknowledging, hey, I don't know what this is yet. I need to ask clarifying questions. I need to find out what the context is. I need to find out more information, and let it prove itself. So when we step out of meaning making in relationships, we can have an honest experience with the other person, and that can inform us to where we go next in our life with this person. Because healthy relationships are based on practical reality. They're very, very honest. They're not unkindly honest. They're warmly honest. It's like, oh, this isn't working for me, but this would work instead. Could we do that? And if that doesn't work for that person, like, I can't do that for you. What can we do instead? Maybe we have a stalemate. Maybe there needs to be a shift in the relationship or an additional resource added. I mean, it's really contextual what happens at that point. But there is a guiding principle that I trust that the other person cares about my well-being and values my well-being. And they trust that I see and value their well-being. And so we're operating towards each other from that premise. And that gives us security to explore these delicate things that arise inevitably in any relationship. So we've got to strip the meaning from it in order to see the reality of it, so we can address it straight on, rather than making assumptions, jumping to conclusions, projecting expectations, or operating from judgment and condemnation. So there you go. In fact, if you guys want to learn about that kind of approach with relationships, February 27th, the relationship strategy will start. There'll be a short enrollment period that opens up the week before, so you can come join us. It's 12 weeks long. I'm going to be taking you through those principles of building consent-based relationships, communication that creates understanding and connection, and conflict that creates intimacy and attachment stability. So we're going to be talking about how that functions, give you those foundations. So February 27th, my friends. Okay, that is today's episode. Go out, watch for the meaning you're applying to things. There needs to be some more information on how to do this. I'll give it to you now. You can tell you're making a meaning because you're coming from a reactive state towards something. Like someone does a thing, you're like, oh, it must mean this or that. There's a lot of power and emotion around it. And we need to acknowledge that and legitimize that power and emotion, because it does come from a rational premise. Then we have to discover the relevancy of it. All right, so I'm feeling this big like surge of like they don't like me because they said no. Well, no, they're not saying that. They said, "Hey, can't do it today. Maybe tomorrow." Oh, they're negotiating. Okay, this isn't the person from 3 years ago. This is a different person. We're having a different experience. That's an example of catching meaning and stopping it and then checking in with reality. But watch out for signals of story. That's going to be strong emotions. They feel very absolute and true and real, but are not necessarily recognizing what is real right now. What is the actual situation happening? What's the actual context this is experienced in? And then this is not to bypass the emotions that show up, because the emotions that show up are legitimate, period. It's that we need to understand their relevancy to the current context as well as care for them because they're alive in us. So I have a tool that helps us do this, and it's called the Get Sober Practice, the Get Sober Guide. You can click, there's links above on Facebook, below on YouTube, to the FTS library. You click on that, go to PDF tools and guides, or PDF guides, and go down to the Get Sober Practice. It'll actually lead you through the sane-making practice, help you get grounded into a conscious sense about what's real, and get you out of the meaning-making. So there you go. And that's free. So go use it. My students use it. My clients use it. It's one of the popular tools out there that I've created. So go for it, my friends. Go gently with yourself. Remember to take some time to play today. Play is really important to our well-being. Let's keep that in mind too. Okay. And I will see you guys on our next episode. Have a great day, guys. Bye-bye.